Hello, hello. Welcome back to Let's Talk Ray Bradbury, the show here on Let's Talk Entertainment, where beginning in 2018, I've been attempting to read and review each of the roughly 600 short stories written by the late great author. Today we are up to story number 288, which is also the fourth of 21 stories in his 1997 collection Driving Blind. Today's story is House Divided. If you're new to the channel, if you're new to the show, the way that this whole thing works is I do a brief synopsis of what happens in the story, and then I wrap up with just a very light analysis of what I thought of it, what stood out to me. Is it a good story, worth your time to read? And I mainly do this for my own entertainment, my own enrichment, and basically to sort of document this journey of attempting to read and review so many short stories by one author. So here we go. After their uncle is shot in a hunting accident, young brothers and all their relatives meet at another relative's house. I guess it's their aunt and uncle. But brothers Chris and Leo are hanging out with their girl cousins, Vivian and Shirley, and while the adults are talking downstairs, awaiting the bad news, the phone call from the hospital, they go upstairs to Vivian's rooms to, of all things, tell ghost stories. Vivian expertly tells the ageless childhood ghost story of, the intruder in the house and the slow counting of steps up the stairs, and then someone enters your room, and at the last second, the storyteller yells, "Gotcha!" Vivian does this, she yells, "Gotcha!" and this arouses the attention of her parents, who said, you need to be quiet upstairs. So there's actual steps come up the stairs in that occasion to tell them to be quiet. Next, it's Chris's turn to tell a story. They turn the lights out, and he attempts to weave a story about a dark castle and a damsel in distress who's trying to escape from a witch. But while he's trying to tell this story, Vivian begins to kiss him in the dark. Allegedly, their brothers and sisters can't see them, but she's kissing him, and she even seems to be fumbling with his belt and sort of described as buttons being undone. Which is a little weird because they were described as being cousins, but I'm not going to get into the politics of all of that just yet. The narrator then describes Chris, suddenly being aware of his body for the first time, as happens to people around this age, 12, 13, or thereabouts. And then they do hear, again, more steps coming slowly up the stairs as if to recreate the ghost story, but they flip the lights on, and it is Vivian's mother to tell them that the uncle has indeed passed away. Chris sort of begins to cry, and he's sort of thinking about what's going on, and he sort of acknowledged the idea that he's sort of just first discovered his body as the body has been taken away from his uncle, but he's crying, and only Vivian seems to sort of recognize that it's possibly tears of joy from what they've just been doing, but Chris is crying nonetheless, and his mother attempts to comfort him. Okay, so this is a weird, oddly incestuous sounding story. The girls are described as girl cousins, and maybe they're actual cousins, maybe they're not, maybe they're cousins long removed. The way people describe their families and their friends is sometimes different, and Bradbury, of course, came from an older generation, so perhaps there's something else here. Maybe I'm focusing on the incest a bit too much. But beyond the incest, if you get away from that, it is really a story about some very human occurrences. When you grow up, there's a couple of things that you have to learn to deal with and to discover. One is sort of the first death in the family. I distinctly remember the death of my grandmother. That was a very traumatic time for me. And then, of course, the other is the sort of a self-discovery of sex and of going through puberty and all of that. And in this case, poor young Chris goes through both of these occurrences at the same time, probably hence the part of the title, House Divided. It's not just the division between the adults and the children being upstairs and downstairs and sort of dealing with these tragic situations in their own different way, but it's also sort of the division of speaking of the body as being the house of your spirit. And so, of course, this one person is losing their body as he is discovering his, and it all sort of meshes in that sort of way. Bradbury, I would say, throughout the story, and the best asset of the story is that it does build tension effectively. It sort of parallels the idea of telling scary stories, which are themselves about tension. And then, of course, it parallels Chris just having his, physiological, his biological awakening, sort of, if you describe the body as a house. And of course, you had the real footsteps at times, sort of paralleling the footsteps in the stories. And I sort of remember, times where growing up, sort of I was awaiting bad news, and you would hear a parent coming up the steps, and that journey up the steps was, in fact, bad news. And of course, bad news is scary to a little child. And of course, there's also this sort of parallel where horror is like that. Horror is a bit of all of these experiences sort of all wrapped up into one. And of course, I think there's also a parallel between sex and horror as well. So all of this is sort of all thrown together in a melting pot by Ray Bradbury in Driving Blind, which is a good little incestuous story, if you will. Next time, we'll be looking at story number 5 of 21 in this collection, our 289th story overall, Grand Theft. So be sure to subscribe and to tune in a couple of days to find out what Grand Theft is all about. Thank you, and I will see you again soon. Go tell some ghost stories. See you later.